Hey everyone, thanks for coming back today. I've got a Tucson, Arizona story for you. I never imagined that a spontaneous trip to check on my sick mother would turn into the most horrifying afternoon of my entire life. My name is Shannon, and I am 32 years old, but in that moment I felt like a helpless child again. I had just driven 2 hours from Phoenix to Tucson with a heavy heart to surprise my mother, whom I believed was battling a severe illness. As I stepped onto the familiar concrete porch, my elderly neighbor suddenly dropped her garden hose and screamed at me with a face twisted in terror. "Shannon, don't go inside. It's a trap. Run away now, before it is too late." Her warning froze the blood in my veins, but the sudden ringing of my cell phone snapped me back to reality. The screen displayed the name of my older sister, so I answered with trembling fingers, only to hear her hysterical screaming on the other end. "Shannon, Mom is dying. The doctor says she needs heart surgery right now. I need you to transfer $15,000 immediately or we will lose her." I looked at the neighbor standing in her yard, and then at the silent house in front of me, while my sister cried about a hospital emergency. The impossible contradiction forced me to make a split-second decision to back away from the front door and hide behind the dense oleander bushes near the garage to observe the truth. But before I reveal the shocking truth that destroyed my family, please subscribe to the channel and press the like button if you enjoy these real-life stories. Tell me in the comments which city you are watching from today. Now let's return to that fateful afternoon. 5 minutes after I scrambled behind the dusty oleander bushes, the distinct roar of a high-performance engine shattered the quiet afternoon silence of the neighborhood. I pressed my body flat against the stucco wall as a brand-new cherry-red convertible sports car pulled into the driveway where an ambulance should have been parked. A wave of nausea washed over me when I recognized the vehicle model because Aaron had explicitly told me they needed $40,000 last month for a specialized mobility van to transport our mother to her dialysis appointments. The driver's door swung open to reveal Aaron stepping out with the vibrant energy of someone returning from a luxury vacation rather than a hospital bedside. She was not wearing the frantic expression of a grieving daughter, but instead hummed a cheerful pop song while retrieving several glossy shopping bags from the passenger seat. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I watched her casually kick the car door shut and strut toward the front entrance without a single care in the world. I waited until the front door clicked shut before I crept closer to the side of the house to find a vantage point. There was a narrow gap in the living room velvet curtains that had not been fully closed, which provided a perfect view into the brightly lit interior. My breath caught in my throat and my heart stopped beating for a terrifying second when I saw my mother Moira walking confidently across the hardwood floor. Moira was not clutching her chest in agony or lying on a stretcher surrounded by paramedics, as the desperate phone call had suggested. She was holding a large crystal glass filled with red wine and was currently twirling around to admire herself in a full-length mirror. Erin dumped the shopping bags onto the expensive leather sofa and began pulling out designer dresses that still had the price tags attached to them. I pressed my ear against the cold window pane to hear their conversation, and the sound of their laughter pierced through the glass like a knife. Moira took a long sip of wine before picking up a sequined evening gown to hold against her body, while complaining that the color might be too bold for the country club dinner. Erin laughed loudly and assured her that the dress was perfect, because they had plenty of money coming in to buy accessories to match it. Shannon is so incredibly gullible that she probably transferred the funds before I even hung up the phone. Erin boasted while pouring herself a glass of wine from the bottle on the coffee table. "That girl always had a soft heart and an empty head when it comes to family emergencies," Moira replied with a smirk as she tossed the expensive dress onto a pile of other new clothes. "Make sure you call her back in an hour to say the surgery was successful, so she sends the recovery money next week." The scene before me blurred as the devastating weight of their deception crashed down on my shoulders with the force of a physical blow. I suddenly felt foolish for every single moment I had spent worrying about her health during the last 5 years. I thought about the countless nights I spent working overtime shifts at the marketing firm in Phoenix, until my eyes burned from exhaustion just to pay for surgeries that never happened. A painful memory surfaced of me, sitting alone in my cramped studio apartment eating instant noodles for dinner on Thanksgiving because I had sent my entire holiday bonus to Tucson. I had denied myself vacations, new clothes, and even basic comforts because I truly believed my family was drowning in insurmountable medical debt. I drove a 10-year-old sedan that broke down constantly so that my mother could supposedly afford life-saving medication. But as I watched them toast to their cleverness in that opulent living room, I realized I was financing a lifestyle for them that I could never afford for myself. The expensive furniture, the renovation of the kitchen visible in the background, and the sports car outside were all paid for with my blood and sweat. They were living like queens on my hard-earned salary while I scraped by in the city believing I was a good daughter. The sadness that had consumed me during the drive from Phoenix began to evaporate rapidly in the heat of a rising fury. I wanted to smash the window and scream at them until my throat bled, but I knew that a momentary outburst would not be enough. They had stolen years of my life and financial stability with their lies, so I needed to be smart about how I handled this betrayal. I slowly backed away from the window with a cold determination settling in my chest because I knew I needed undeniable proof before I confronted them. 30 minutes after fleeing from the deceptive quiet of that upscale neighborhood, I sat alone in a secluded booth at a coffee shop on the outskirts of the city, with my hands still trembling violently around a glass of ice water. I needed to physically distance myself from that house because my first instinct had been to kick down the front door and scream until the police arrived to arrest them. However, I knew from painful experience that confronting them without a concrete plan would only result in them twisting the narrative to make me look like the ungrateful villain. They were absolute masters of emotional manipulation who would claim I was hallucinating due to stress, or that the wine was actually grape juice for a medical deficiency. I took a long sip of the cold water to force my frantic heart rate down because I needed to think like a strategic marketing executive rather than a heartbroken daughter. The relative silence of the coffee shop was suddenly interrupted by the relentless vibration of my cell phone on the wooden table as Erin continued her digital assault. She sent a barrage of frantic text messages claiming that the doctors were preparing the operating theater and that our mother's blood pressure was dropping dangerously low. Then she sent a grainy photograph that was supposed to be definitive proof of the dire situation unfolding at the hospital to guilt me into compliance. The image displayed an elderly woman lying in a hospital bed with tubes running out of her nose and mouth while hooked up to several complex machines. I zoomed in on the picture, but something about the lighting and the medical equipment looked strangely artificial compared to the modern hospitals I had visited in Phoenix. I decided to call my best friend Kelly, who had been working as a senior nurse in an intensive care unit for over a decade, to get a professional opinion. She answered on the second ring with a worried tone because she knew I was supposed to be driving on the highway. I explained the situation briefly without giving away too much emotion and forwarded the image to her while holding my breath for her verdict. "Shannon, you need to look much closer at the background of this picture right now, because this is absolutely not a real patient environment," Kelly said with a sharp tone of disbelief after studying the file for less than 10 seconds. That ventilator model was discontinued by most major hospitals over 10 years ago because of safety issues, and the IV line is taped to the arm, but it is not actually inserted into the vein if you zoom in on the wrist. This looks like a stock image from an old medical textbook or a bad website that anyone could download. Hearing Kelly confirm the fraud caused the last shred of my denial to evaporate into thin air and replaced my sadness with a cold determination. I thanked her for her professional expertise and hung up the phone with a resolve hardening in my chest to make them pay for this cruelty. I drafted a text message to Aaron with careful precision to buy myself enough time to build a trap of my own without raising their suspicions. I typed that I was currently at the bank branch, but the manager required a 24-hour security hold to release such a large sum of money due to fraud protection protocols. Aaron replied almost instantly with a string of angry emojis, but eventually accepted the excuse because she believed the money was guaranteed to arrive tomorrow. Now that I had secured a temporary ceasefire with that lie, I needed to turn my attention to the serious legal consequences of their actions. I scrolled through my contact list until I found the number for my lawyer, Mr. Vance, who had helped me with my business contracts in the past. It was late in the afternoon, but he picked up immediately when he saw my name on the caller ID because he knew I rarely called outside of office hours. I need to schedule an emergency meeting with you first thing tomorrow morning regarding a case of significant financial fraud and identity theft, I said to him with a steady voice that surprised even me. I have reason to believe that my family has not only stolen my savings under false pretenses, but also opened credit lines in my name without my consent. Mr. Vance listened without interruption as I outlined the basics of the situation, and he agreed to clear his schedule for me at 8 o'clock sharp. I placed the phone down and stared out the window at the parking lot while formulating the next steps of my plan to expose them. This was no longer a family dispute about money or a misunderstanding about health that could be solved with a conversation. This was a criminal operation that had targeted my livelihood, and I was ready to bring the full weight of the law down upon them. The next morning, I stood at the reception desk of the Tucson General Hospital, where Aaron had confidently claimed my mother was receiving intensive monthly treatments. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the hushed whispers of patients in the waiting room usually made me feel anxious, but today, I only felt a cold numbness. I approached the administrative window and handed my identification to the receptionist while requesting a complete printout of every admission record for my mother Moira over the past year. The woman behind the glass typed the name into her database while I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. She frowned at the screen and typed the information a second time before turning the monitor toward me with a sympathetic expression. The digital records showed absolutely zero admissions or emergency room visits for anyone matching my mother's name or social security number in the last 6 months. I felt the room spin slightly, but I refused to accept that the elaborate invoices Aaron had sent me were complete fabrications without a second opinion. I pulled up the high-resolution photos of the medical bills on my phone and demanded to speak with a medical professional who could explain the discrepancy. A doctor on duty happened to be passing by the administration desk and stopped to inspect the digital receipts I was displaying with desperate urgency. He adjusted his glasses and studied the documents for a long moment before shaking his head with a look of professional disdain for the forgery. "Young lady, these papers are fake. The medication codes are completely wrong, and our hospital never uses this font on invoices." Hearing those words from a medical authority shattered the final illusion of my mother's illness and replaced it with a burning realization of criminal intent. They had not just lied to me about a headache or a flu, they had painstakingly forged federal documents to orchestrate a long-term financial heist against their own family member. I thanked the doctor with a voice void of emotion and walked out of the automatic doors into the blinding morning sunlight. My next stop was the downtown branch of the local bank where I held a joint account with my mother that was intended strictly for life or death emergencies. I sat across from a bank officer in a private glass cubicle and requested a hard copy of every single transaction made within the last 12 months. The laser printer in the corner whirred rhythmically as it churned out page after page of financial evidence that would seal their fate. I picked up the stack of warm paper and my eyes widened in horror as I scanned the rows of merchant names that looked nothing like a medical history. There were absolutely no payments to pharmacies, clinics, or specialists listed anywhere on the lengthy document in my hands. The statement read like a travel brochure for the wealthy, with exorbitant charges for five-star resorts, luxury day spas, and high-end steakhouses. I saw a charge for $400 at a celebrity hair salon on the exact same day Erin had told me Mom was in a coma. I saw another transaction for $1,000 at a designer boutique on the day I had skipped lunch to save money for their rent. The sheer audacity of their spending habits made my stomach churn with a mixture of disgust and betrayal. The bank officer cleared his throat nervously and turned his computer screen to show me an even darker secret lurking in my file. He revealed that Erin had used my personal information to open 2 supplementary credit cards under my name without my knowledge or consent. Both cards were currently maxed out with overdue balances that were actively destroying the excellent credit score I had built over a decade of hard work. I stared at the red numbers on the screen and realized that they had not only stolen my cash, but had also mortgaged my future. I asked the officer to print those details as well, and placed every single sheet of paper into a thick manila folder with trembling hands. The scorching heat of my anger had cooled down into a block of ice that sat heavily in the center of my chest. I walked out of the bank with the heavy weapon I needed to end their parasitic existence once and for all. At 12 o'clock noon, I returned to the old street and knocked on the door of Mrs. Doherty, the woman who had saved me from the trap yesterday. The familiar wooden door swung open almost immediately to reveal the kind, elderly face that had been a fixture of my childhood memories for as long as I could remember. Mrs. Doherty ushered me into her cozy living room, which smelled of dried lavender and old paper, while looking at me with eyes full of deep pity and sadness. She pulled me into a warm embrace that felt more maternal than anything I had received from my own mother in decades, and guided me to sit on her floral sofa. She explained with a trembling voice that she had watched the deception unfold for years and had desperately wanted to reach out to me, but Erin had changed all the landline numbers and blocked my contact information from the neighbors. I sat there in stunned silence as she began to recount the horrifying reality of what happened in that house across the street, the moment my car disappeared down the highway after every visit. She described wild parties that shook the quiet neighborhood walls late into the night, whenever a wire transfer notification pinged on Erin's expensive smartphone. The mother I thought was bedridden with a failing heart was actually known as the life of the party, who danced on tables and drank expensive champagne until sunrise while mocking my concern. My heart sank further into my stomach as Mrs. Doherty described how they would perform skits in the front yard, mimicking my worried phone calls for the amusement of their intoxicated guests. It was not just greed that drove them, but a malicious delight in exploiting my loyalty and love for their own entertainment. Mrs. Doherty reached across the small coffee table to squeeze my hand tightly, as if preparing me for the most painful revelation of the entire conversation. "They laugh at you every day, Shannon. Erin tells the whole neighborhood that you are the stupidest walking ATM in the world." Hearing those words spoken aloud by a third party turned the dull ache in my chest into a sharp and agonizing wound that finally killed the last lingering hope I held for them. I needed to see this cruelty with my own eyes, so Mrs. Doherty led me to her personal computer, where she managed a high-tech security system installed after a recent string of break-ins in the area. She navigated through the digital folders with surprising proficiency and clicked on a video file dated from last night, exactly around the time I was hiding in the bushes, terrified for my mother's life. The high-definition screen flickered to life, showing the backyard of my mother's house, illuminated by expensive string lights and the warm glow of a custom fire pit. There was Moira holding a wine bottle like a microphone, twirling clumsily on the manicured grass without a single sign of physical frailty or pain. She looked vibrant and energetic as she performed a drunken pirouette that would be impossible for a woman allegedly suffering from heart failure. Then came the audio, which cut through the recording with crystal clarity, thanks to the high-quality microphone on the security camera. Erin's voice boomed through the speakers as she raised a glass to toast their success, while standing next to the new sports car I had seen earlier. She was bragging loudly to an unseen guest that the $15,000 I was sending for the surgery would actually be used to fund a luxury summer vacation across Europe. I watched in horror as my mother laughed hysterically at the joke and added that they should send me a souvenir postcard from Paris to thank me for my hard work. I asked Mrs. Doherty if I could have a copy of the footage, and she immediately transferred the file to my smartphone via a secure connection. This video was the final nail in the coffin because it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that their illness was a calculated performance to rob me blind. I thanked Mrs. Doherty profusely for her honesty and for being the only person in this entire neighborhood who cared enough to tell me the truth. I walked out of her house with the digital evidence burning in my pocket and a plan forming in my mind that would bring their European dreams crashing down to earth. At 4 o'clock sharp in the afternoon, I took a deep breath to steady my nerves and pressed the call button for Erin, forcing my voice to sound as panicked and desperate as possible. The phone rang only once before she picked up with an impatient tone that suggested I was interrupting something far more important than her dying mother. I immediately launched into a frantic apology, claiming that the bank transfer had failed, but I had found an even better solution to save Mom's life. I told her that I had just signed emergency papers to mortgage my condo in Phoenix and secured a massive cash loan of $50,000 to ensure Mom received the best treatment available. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening for a split second before Erin's entire demeanor shifted from annoyance to a terrifyingly sweet excitement. The prospect of receiving more than triple the original amount instantly erased her previous anger and replaced it with a greed so palpable I could almost hear her salivating. "Oh my God, you are absolutely amazing, Shannon. I knew in my heart you would never abandon Mom in her time of need. You need to bring that cash home right now because the doctor just discharged her to wait for the surgery in the comfort of her own bed." I agreed to drive over immediately and hung up the phone with a feeling of profound disgust settling in the pit of my stomach. I drove my car to a spot down the street where I had parked yesterday and retrieved a pair of high-powered binoculars from my glove compartment to watch the show. Through the lenses, I could see the interior of the house erupt into chaotic activity, as if someone had kicked an anthill. The leisurely afternoon of drinking and trying on clothes was instantly replaced by a frantic scramble to construct a stage for their tragic play. I watched Erin running around the living room, gathering armfuls of empty wine bottles and designer shopping bags to stuff them into the hallway closet out of sight. She moved with a speed and efficiency that was impressive for someone who claimed to be exhausted from caretaking duties all week. Meanwhile, Moira was busy in the bedroom clearing away the jewelry and makeup from her vanity to replace them with rows of generic medicine bottles and boxes of tissues. The most disturbing part of their preparation came when Erin pulled out a makeup kit and began applying pale white powder to our mother's face to simulate a deathly pallor. She carefully darkened the circles under Moira's eyes and messed up her hair to make her look frail and neglected. Once the transformation was complete, Moira climbed into the bed and pulled the heavy comforter up to her chin while practicing a weak cough. It was a masterclass in deception that they had clearly rehearsed and perfected over years of extracting money from me. I lowered the binoculars and picked up the thick manila folder containing the bank statements, the hospital records, and the digital copy of the security footage. There was no check for $50,000 in my purse, nor was there any mortgage paperwork for my home. The only thing I was bringing into that house was the cold, hard truth that would shatter their comfortable lives forever. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door with a steady rhythm, no longer the scared sister, but the executioner of their fraud. At 6 o'clock in the evening, I stepped through the familiar front door and was immediately assaulted by the overpowering stench of mentholated oil that they had sprayed to mimic a sick room. The house was dim and quiet, a stark contrast to the party atmosphere I had witnessed on the security tape just hours before. Aaron rushed out from the hallway with eyes that were perfectly rimmed in red, likely irritated by onions or eye drops to simulate hours of crying. She threw her arms around me in a suffocating embrace that felt more like a shakedown than a greeting, and whispered her first question into my ear. "Oh, thank God you are finally here, Shannon. Did you bring the check? Is the $50,000 safe in your bag?" I ignored her question and gently pushed past her to walk straight toward the master bedroom where the main act of their drama was waiting. My mother Moira was lying in the center of the bed under a mountain of blankets, her face pale and her breathing shallow and ragged. She opened her eyes slowly as I approached, delivering a performance that would have won an award if the audience wasn't already aware of the script. She reached out a trembling hand toward me, her voice barely a whisper as she delivered the lines designed to crush my heart. "My sweet daughter, I thought I wouldn't live long enough to see you one last time. The pain is unbearable, but seeing your face makes me ready to close my eyes in peace." I stood at the foot of the bed and looked down at them with a calmness that seemed to unsettle Aaron, who was hovering nervously by the door. Instead of reaching into my bag for the money, I pulled out my smartphone and tapped the screen to connect it wirelessly to the large smart TV mounted on the bedroom wall. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the dark room with the bright, high-definition footage of the backyard party from the previous night. The silence in the room was absolute as the video played, showing a vibrant Moira dancing across the lawn with a wine bottle in hand, looking nothing like the dying woman in the bed. Then came the audio booming through the surround sound speakers featuring Aaron's voice, mocking me as a walking ATM and planning their European vacation with my money. Moira sat up in bed with shocking speed, her fake cough forgotten, staring at the screen with her mouth open in horror, while Aaron turned pale for real this time. Before they could stammer out a single excuse, I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick stack of documents I had collected over the last 24 hours. I threw the papers into the air, letting the bank statements, the fake hospital invoices, and the doctor's written confirmation of fraud rain down on the bed like confetti. The sheets were covered in evidence of their spa trips, the designer clothes, and the credit card debt they had racked up in my name. "The curtain has fallen on your little play. There is no surgery money. There is no dutiful daughter anymore. There is only evidence of fraud and a court summons for both of you." The shock on their faces quickly morphed into ugly defensive rage as they realized their golden goose had not only stopped laying eggs, but was now biting back. Aaron screamed that I was spying on them and violating their privacy, while Moira threw off the blankets and stood up miraculously cured of her heart failure. They began to yell over each other, claiming I was heartless for keeping score with family, and that I owed them this money for raising me. But their shouts meant nothing to me anymore. They were just the desperate noises of criminals who had finally been caught. The room fell into a terrifying silence after their screaming match ended, leaving only the sound of incriminating papers rustling on the hardwood floor under the cool breeze from the air conditioner. I looked at the two women who were supposed to be my protectors and realized that the bond between us had been severed long before I walked through that door today. I took a step back to create physical distance from their toxicity and delivered the news that would permanently alter the course of their comfortable lives. "I did not just come here to cut off your allowance or shout at you for lying," I said with a voice that was dangerously calm compared to their hysteria. "I spent the entire morning at the police station and the regional IRS office, filing formal reports against both of you for identity theft, credit card fraud, and tax evasion." Aaron turned a shade of gray that was indistinguishable from the ash on a cigarette tip as the color drained from her face. Before she could formulate a denial, her smartphone buzzed loudly on the nightstand with an urgent notification tone that echoed in the quiet room. She snatched the device with trembling hands and tapped the screen, her eyes widening in sheer panic as she read the automated alert from the bank. The text message confirmed that all accounts associated with her name and my joint account had been frozen, pending a federal investigation effective immediately. Furthermore, a second notification popped up from the leasing company, stating that a repossession order had been issued for the red sports car parked in the driveway due to fraudulent financing applications. "You ruined everything!" Erin shrieked as she lunged toward the bed to grab the stack of evidence I had thrown there, thinking she could destroy the proof. I stepped forward with an authority I never knew I possessed and shoved her back hard enough that she stumbled against the dresser. She looked at me with shock because the submissive sister she had bullied for decades was gone, replaced by a woman who was no longer afraid of her. "Do not touch those papers because the police already have digital copies of everything," I warned her with a steel gaze that froze her in place. "You are not going to jail for a misunderstanding, Erin. You are going to jail because you stole my identity to live a life you didn't earn." Moira, realizing that her anger was getting her nowhere, decided to switch tactics back to the emotional manipulation that had worked so well in the past. She threw herself onto the floor and crawled toward my feet, clutching the hem of my pants, while sobbing theatrically about the sacrifices of motherhood. "Shannon, please don't do this to your own flesh and blood," she wailed, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. "I gave birth to you. I carried you for 9 months and raised you when your father left us. You can't send your own mother to prison over money." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet and felt absolutely nothing but a cold detachment. The guilt that used to control my every decision had evaporated, leaving behind a clarity that allowed me to see her for exactly what she was. "You didn't raise a daughter, Moira. You groomed a retirement plan," I replied while pulling my leg away from her grasp. "A mother protects her child, but you preyed on me like a parasite. I don't have a mother or a sister anymore. I only see 2 strangers who need to find a good lawyer." I turned my back on their renewed cries of desperation and walked out of the bedroom without looking back once. I marched down the hallway where I had seen photos of myself as a child, realizing they were just props in a house built on lies. When I stepped out the front door, I saw Mrs. Doherty and several other neighbors standing on their lawns watching the scene with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. They saw Erin running out the door screaming my name, but I simply got into my car and locked the doors. I started the engine and reversed out of the driveway, leaving the red sports car behind as a monument to their greed. As I drove toward the highway and watched the house disappear in my rearview mirror, the heavy weight that had pressed on my chest for years finally lifted. The sun was setting over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. This story serves as a painful but necessary reminder that family is not defined solely by blood, but by mutual respect, love, and honesty. We are often taught from a young age that we must sacrifice everything for our parents and siblings, but that loyalty should never be weaponized to exploit us. True family builds you up rather than tearing you down for financial gain. Blind filial piety does not create gratitude in toxic people. It only feeds an endless hunger for greed that will eventually consume your entire life. We must have the courage to face the ugly truth about the people we love, even when it breaks our hearts. Cutting ties with a toxic family member is not an act of betrayal or cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation and self-love that allows you to reclaim your future. Thank you so much for listening to Shannon's journey from victimization to freedom. I hope this story gives strength to anyone who might be trapped in a similar situation to stand up for themselves. What do you think about Shannon's decision to report her family to the police? Was she too harsh? Or did they get exactly what they deserved? Please share your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories.